Hey guys, I want to talk about a concept called ant on a nail. And basically, when I was in this cult group, I couldn't figure out why this cult group just kept on regenerating itself. Like the turnover rate was very high. It was almost 50% turnover rate. You know, people will quit and other people join. But someone told me this, and it finally made sense when they told it to me why this cult group just kept on going. So think of a nail on a board that sticks out, and you have a bunch of ants just walking over it, and you have a hammer. Every time an ant walks over it, you just hit it, and and then you just have a bunch of ants just walking over it over and over again. And so what happened is when you're part of an organization that is kind of in a lot of cases, just any organization, you will create a culture, right? And what happens, sometimes the culture can be toxic or not toxic, but people end up leaving. But because there's a mechanism involved that always bring in new members, and that group ends up taking a life of its own, right? And what happened is it becomes self-sustaining. And what happens, even different people leave from different levels of hierarchy. But even when different levels of people leave from the different hierarchy, the organization still keeps on going because it's like an ant walking on top of a nail. It's just people just keeps on going, creating that motion going. And after a while, it becomes its own entity. And that's when it gets really scary because then no one is in control of that entity. And what happened is when you leave, let's just say you're like upper echelon and you decide to leave and you speak out against the group, you're still not very powerful because now the entity is more powerful than the individual. And different people will replace you very quickly. And that's what it means by ant on a nail. When you leave, a different ant will get on top of the nail to get hammered. Now, this is very important because let's just say you work at a job and you hate it. And you're like, man, who would want to work this stupid job when you leave, right? And then someone else takes the job. And then they work for it for 6 months, a year, 2 years. And then they leave and somebody else takes this job. And the corporation or organization doesn't really care if you leave because they know that a different person will take the job and that person will keep that position or that mechanism going, and then they'll get burnt out and they'll leave, and then somebody else comes along, and that's how they keep on going. You know what I mean? Now, granted, eventually if a lot of people leave or they don't have the right people in place, eventually the organization collapse. But if you look closely, this is how cult groups get this is how cult groups get formed and sustain itself. This is how corrupt organizations grow and sustain themselves. This is how government institutes grow and sustain themselves. Is the ant on the nail. You know what I mean? You may have incompetent people running an organization, and then someone who's competent say, you know what, screw this, I'm leaving. So they leave, and then somebody else comes along, takes your position, and they just work at it. 6 months, a year, 5 years later, they quit, they move on, somebody else takes their place, and somehow the organization or the cult group or whatever just keeps on churning along. And so now you kind of understand how that entity keeps on surviving. Now, just by understanding this is so powerful because then you realize that sometimes that organization is within self more powerful than the individual. And it is better just to leave for your own sanity purposes than rather than stay there and try to fix it. Anyways, guys, I hope you liked the video, and I'll talk to you later.